What is an RTO? Welcome to RTO 101. This is Lesson 1, and in this lesson you will learn the following: the definition of an RTO, different RTO types, the registration requirements of an RTO. The official definition of an RTO is that an RTO is an organisation registered in accordance with the AQTF standards for registered training organisations to provide specific vocational education and training and/or assessment services. Basically, an RTO is a college, generally privately owned, a TAFE, schools, primary or high school, universities, etc. Even McDonald's is an RTO. RTOs are registered with specific governing bodies to deliver vocational education and training and/or assessments, and issue qualifications and statement of attainments to a nationally agreed standard. It gives your training and/or assessment services a stamp of approval. There are many different types of RTOs that include funded domestic RTO. They train Australian citizens and are funded by the government to do this training. Non-funded domestic RTO. They only train Australian citizens but are not funded by the government to do this training. Their students pay for their training. There are RTOs of this type, but there are a smaller number of these than all the other RTO types. Both funded and not funded domestic RTO. It is more typical to find an RTO that is a mix of funded and non-funded. Non-funded students are typically called fee-for-service students. Cricos RTO. A Cricos RTO has special registration to deliver vet training to students that come to Australia from other countries on a student visa. They are known as international students. Please note, not students that study from their own countries. And they have very strict rules and regulations they must follow to remain in Australia on their student visa. The only difference between a Cricos college and a funded domestic and non-funded domestic college is the type of students they train. They still deliver vocation, education and training and/or assessment in national training packages. RTO all types. The trend these days is to find an RTO that is a Cricos college that also is a funded RTO and also delivers training to non-funded students. Elicos colleges. They are not an RTO, but they are a Cricos registered college. Elicos is an acronym for English Language Intensive Courses for Overseas Students. They deliver English language training to overseas students who come to Australia on student visas. They also can teach people who have migrated to Australia and have very low levels of English. They are not an RTO. They cannot deliver training in National Training Package qualifications. They are generally registered with NEAS. They deliver courses such as General English, EAP, which is English for Academic Purposes, IELTS, etc. Let's take a closer look at RTO types. Funded domestic RTOs. These RTOs deliver training to students that are completing apprenticeships or traineeships or are being retrained to enter the workforce under another funded contract. Their tuition fees are paid by the government at a state or territory level, and a component of these fees can also be contributed by their employer. As the RTO is receiving payments from the government, they therefore must submit student data to the government on a monthly basis to then receive payment for the training they have delivered to a student. This data submission is known as an event miss submission, and these RTOs are also known as an event miss college. Generally speaking, most event miss colleges do also have a small number of non-funded students as well. These students pay their own fees, and they are normally known as fee-for-service students. There is a set of standards for the data that an event miss college must adhere to, and they are found in the event miss vet provider collection specifications on the NCVR website. They must also use a student management system to manage their student data and these standards. Non-funded domestic RTOs. These types of RTOs are very few nowadays. They have full paying or fee-for-service students only, and they could be schools, both high school and primary schools, higher education providers, and private colleges. CRICOS RTOs. CRICOS is an acronym for Commonwealth Register of Institutes and Courses for Overseas Students. These colleges are the only type of RTO that is allowed to deliver vocational education and training and/or assessments to overseas students within Australia on a student visa. Funded or not funded RTOs are not allowed to do this. There is an extra set of framework and standards known as the National Code 2007 that is part of the ESOS Act that CRICOS RTOs must adhere to. It is possible to have a CRICOS college that also delivers training and/or assessments to domestic, non-funded students as well. Registration requirements of an RTO. The major registration requirements of an RTO comes from the AQTF standards. AQTF is an acronym that is for the Australian Quality Training Framework. There are three main elements of the standards that are Essential Standards for Registration. This comprises three standards relating to training and assessment, client services and management systems. RTO Quality Indicators. This is a set of quality indicators that have been designed to help RTOs conduct evidence-based and outcomes-focused continuous quality improvements. It allows registering bodies to assess the risk of an RTO's operations. There are three main components of quality indicators that are learner engagement. This is in the form of student surveys and feedback forms, for example. Employer satisfaction. This is in the form of surveys and feedback forms, for example. Competency completion. This is in the form of a count of both qualifications and competency enrolments and completion within a calendar year. RTOs can do this manually, but it is highly recommended that they use a student management system for accuracy of counts. The final element of the standards is conditions of registration. When an RTO is applying for an initial registration or renewal of registration, they must sign a declaration that binds it to operate in accordance with the AQTF standards, Essential Standards for Registration. These standards include the condition of registration, which includes 9 conditions. Registration requirements continued. An integral part of the progression to become an RTO and maintain that registration is the participation in audits. The Australian Quality Training Framework standard states that a training organisation will generally be audited when it first applies for registration, again within the first 12 months of initial registration, and then at renewal of registration, which takes place every 5 years. Audits may occur at other times, such as monitoring or strategic audits, or when an RTO wants to extend its scope of registration. This means when an RTO wants to add new qualifications or courses to those they already are approved to deliver training in. The focus of an audit, therefore, is on the outcomes achieved by the RTO. Auditors will evaluate the evidence provided by an RTO against the AQTF Essential Standards of Registration, the conditions of registration and the quality indicators, and in some circumstances the guidelines for RTOs registered in South Australia. In the case of a new applicant making an initial application, the auditors will be looking at what systems, policies and procedures have been put in place to ensure that compliance with the standards can be met. This concludes Lesson 1 of RTO 101. You have learned about the following things: the definition of an RTO, the different RTO types, the registration requirements for an RTO. You will have been provided a workbook that must be completed as part of your training. Good luck.